And we're back online. Welcome back, everyone. If you just joined, we are in the middle of the first part of the first track, which is the marketing track for Hotix Life. And next up is Eric Duerr, founding partner at Massive Global. The topic of your session is particularly intriguing, and we're going to unpack positioning through argument theory.
That's
Tell
right.
us more about that, Eric. Floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much. Welcome. I'm Eric Duerr, founding partner at Massive Global. And I want to talk about what we can learn from Socrates when we think about our positioning and messaging, for marketing. And it's so funny. Like, we are in an environment where we, as marketers, we just need to create content. Like, we have all these little content mouths that need to be fed. We have SEO, we have ads, we have blogs, we have articles, we have all this stuff. And so we end up producing a lot. But there's a saying that I like, which is, if you're lost in the forest, running doesn't help. And so what I want to do is take a couple steps back and say, well, how do we make foundational positioning and foundational messaging that really helps all the other content kind of cohere together? And so that's what this idea of, like, what can we take from Socrates and learn it from marketing strategy? So that's it. The first thing is like, I'm going to show you how to build an argument. And so it's really simple. Like, you should be always thinking about this exercise in your head. Why would someone choose our brand or our product? What are the strongest claims that we can make? And then what would our competitors say? And then it's really important for everyone to agree on what is the argument. So what do I mean by argument? Argument is just not a mere contradiction. This isn't like, hey, I'm at my Thanksgiving dinner table and like arguing with my siblings. Argument, and there's a lot in this slide. I'm not going to read it all, but I hope you do read it. The slides will be available. But this is basically what it is an argument consists of a simple structure of a claim. So I'm making a claim about something. I have a warrant, a reason for you to believe the claim is true, and then the data that supports the reason that it's true, right? So it's really simple. There's all sorts of different arguments that are logical. There's emotional. There's, we use arguments every day. But I'm going to kind of show you like where we mess up on arguments, which is a lot of fun. And one last thing before we hop into some of the exercise is really understanding, like, why do we use an argument-driven methodology? And so we all do this, right? So we all get in and we say, hey, let's brainstorm an idea on a campaign. Let's brainstorm an idea on a value prop. And so what you can see here is the ideas during a brainstorm session, and this was some research that was done that we cite, is basically we've come up with 18 ideas or 20 ideas or 24 ideas, depending on if you're using minimal preparation to the far left, brainstorming, like everyone just come in and throw great ideas up on the whiteboard, or we have debate. And we move away from debate too much. We think sometimes debate means arguing, and argument is bad, but I believe that debate is really, really strong, that we need to create a culture of well-reasoned debates. Now, look at the far right side, and you see ideas after. For the people who did minimal preparation, they really didn't have that many ideas. The people who did the brainstorming had 6 ideas, but the people who went into debate had double of the brainstorming and quadruple of the minimal preparation, which means when we tend to debate and we really understand what is it that we're trying to say, the claim, the warrant, and the evidence, we tend to come up with better ideas even afterwards. So it's a really strong thing to show or to get into. Okay, so let's hop into it. So what is an argument? Okay, so I already talked about it. It's a claim, an evidence, and warrant. Any recovering philosophy students like myself, you've seen this really, you've seen this a lot. So I'm going to make a simple claim. This one is, people who know me would believe this. Eric is untrustworthy because he's always late. So that is the argument. Eric is untrustworthy because he's always late. So just walk you through this. The claim is this, right? Eric is untrustworthy. That's what we're claiming. The evidence is because I'm always late. That's the data we have. We can show that Eric is untrustworthy because he's always late. So the question then is, well, what is the warrant? Now, remember, the warrant is the thing that you have to believe to be true in order for this argument to work. So here we go. He's always late is the warrant of untrustworthy. So in order for you to believe that this statement is true, you have to believe that tardiness is connected to trustworthiness. Now, maybe you do. Maybe you think like, oh, I can't trust anybody who's ever late. But in a lot of cases, we just think like, well, maybe Eric's always late because he's too busy. Or maybe he's untrustworthy because he keeps stealing all the office supplies, right? So here we have a very simple statement that doesn't really make sense once we really unpack it. And often, and I show this one because it's really simple to do, but often as marketers, we write value props or we write positioning that is actually not true. It doesn't get into the mind of what our audiences believe. And so one of the things I would suggest straight away is really look at what is the warrant? What is the reason to believe that this data supports this claim? And I'll tell you that a lot of times we skip over this and we can smell it. We as the receivers of it, we're like, I don't know if that's true. So let me just give you a great example. Car marketers do this all the time. So I took a little bit of liberty just to make sure we're on brand with this ad, but we switched it up a little bit. But here it is. Women love men who drive the Lincoln MKZs, right? Really? So you can imagine this type of ad coming out, and for you to believe, they're making an argument, but for you to believe this to be true, you'd have to believe that all men who drive these Lincolns are loved by women, which just doesn't seem right? So then when we get into the arguments, we have to think about, well, what are the fallacies that we tend to use? What are and we use them a lot, and then that's where our messaging and our positioning just kind of falls apart. So here's a couple different fallacies that we tend to use a lot. One is a straw man. So this is when you misrepresent someone else's argument and trying to make it like pretty easy to dismiss, like, oh, they always say this, right? And we do this a lot when we try to compare ourselves to competitors, is that we make straw man arguments that then our audience sit there and say, I don't know. I don't believe that to be true, right? So that's a straw man. The second one we do a lot is the middle ground. So you take one extreme and the other extreme. It's like, hey, we're always going to protect this data thing like this, blah, 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 blah. And someone says, well, that's ridiculous. That will never work. So the right answer must be in the middle. Well, that's not necessarily true either. Composition fallacy is when like you assume that all parts of something, kind of the composition of them creates something, that's not true. So back to car manufacturing, all of our parts are lightweight and efficient. Therefore, our car is the most efficient. Well, no, that doesn't make sense. Just because all the parts are the most efficient doesn't mean the entirety of it is the most efficient. And then the false dichotomy is, assuming that we do this a lot, like, hey, only these two things can be true, so the rest of these also can't be true. False dichotomies happen quite a bit. So watch out for the fallacies that we make. Our audiences and ourselves, we hear them all the time, right? And that's why we turn off from marketing. And then finally, I would suggest one last thing is look for commercial insights. Look for the insights that help support the data that supports your argument, that makes you think about your product differently. So saying something like, stating something that is already obvious isn't necessarily going to be data that's going to support your claim. And so you're going to want to find really interesting, insightful evidence that changes the way that people think about their business. And the last thing, and I know because we're going quick on time, the last thing I'm going to talk about here is how do you assess the strengths of an argument? And I would offer you to do this exercise. Write up an argument for why should someone buy your brand? Why would someone choose it? Why would someone choose a product? Write them out as fast as you can. Brainstorm this stuff out and debate them. Remember, the debates create better ideation. And then do this simple idea. You go ahead and score each of your arguments and you say, how disruptive is it? Give it a 1 to 5. Is that argument really disruptive? Is that claim really disruptive? Number 2, is it differentiated? Can someone else make that same claim? And finally, what is that evidence? What is that defensibility that we have? And remember that warrant, that defensibility has to be a part of why that claim makes sense. And that's it, right? So I think if you really take a look at like all of your value props, all of your positioning, all of the claims that you're making, and really think about not just what is the evidence, but what is the reason that someone believes that evidence to be true. All right, and that's it.
There you have it. Nail your positioning through argument theory. Eric, this was awesome. I enjoyed it more than you know. So thank you for that. If anyone has additional questions, feel free to write them in the chat. By the way, Christina says, great section as well. So it's funny because, you know, when we talk about being marketers, we constantly talk about doing the research, talking to your customers and, you know, nailing your ICP and understanding more about the data. But you're raising a very valid point around, yes, you should do that. But also there is like a moment of, you know, synthesis, like where you need to think through the data that you have to get to a place where you can have a statement that can resonate with your audience based on evidence, which I find very, very fascinating.
Yeah, it really shows up. The place where it pops the most is you look at customer case studies.
Yes.
Often we do case studies that we try to back end into some sort of value prop.
Right.
And so the customer's saying this, and we're trying to say this, and then we just kind of make it work. But you know it when you read it. And so I think case studies is one of the first places where you can really begin to look at it, saying, are we making an argument that is coherent, that really resonates with our ICP or the other things that we're trying to push through?
And I think the key point that you were hammering on like more than a few times is like that warrant part, right? Like, what is the thing that you need to believe to be true for this statement to make sense?
That's right. That's right. It's and if you can do it, boy, like it particularly sales, the best way. How many times have we created marketing decks that sales never uses? Because they inherently know this, like especially the really good sellers, the ones that only use whiteboards and napkins to make their sales. And so the best way, the way I look at it is if sales believes my arguments, and which is why you always partner with your sales teams to do this, and you guys can argue that out. You'll ask them, like, what is the best way? Like, how do you persuade someone to buy? Don't tell me features and benefits.
I believe that is even more like always been relevant, right? To some degree, but even more so these days when like as a society, you find people that believes all kind of things and polarize in all kind of ways. And so you have to find a common ground to have those conversations, like the things that, you can believe to be true.
That's right.
Interesting. So like the difference between arguing and debating, what is that?
Well, I actually put it all in the school of rhetoric.
Okay.
So I think a lot of people hear argument and they think of contradictory. And there's a link in that thing. There's a wonderful Monty Python skit saying, I'm looking for an argument. It's like, this is an argument. It's mere contradiction. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. Right. And so you want to avoid
I had this feeling already.
That's right. And so, with argument theory, like, there's so much you can do in rhetoric. And if people who want to read about it, there's a book called Rhetoric by a guy named Aristotle. It's been around.
Yeah.
But he talks about means of persuasion.
Might have heard of him.
Yeah, that's right. Like, you can persuade people through ethos, like, hey, I'm your doctor. You should believe me. You should have it by pathos, like, hey, I'm a really good person. You're a good, you like me. So that's another way of persuasion. Or logos, like the logical structure of an argument. And when you mix them all together, like if you try a pathos argument with a judge, like, hey, I'm so sorry I was speeding, judge, but I'm a really nice guy. He's like, whatever.
Here's your fine.
That's right. And so we have to, as marketers, we have to construct like the emotional valence, right? Like, is this a brand that I connect with? There's a lot of brands out there. Like when I go buy a car, there's so many brands I just don't connect with. It may be a really good product. I just don't connect them. And then you have the functional affinity. Those things are just pathos, ethos, logos, right?
Would you say that the best companies and brands have all those elements, or would you say that you have to pick one or two and like really nail those down?
They do. We use all three all the time, but you have some brands like in tech, we tend to use the ethos logos a ton. We just sit there and say, here are the 5 reasons that you should believe this to be true, and that's it. And we kind of forget
making the world better.
Yeah, that's right. And we forget that even in B2B, it's an emotional, like, do I resonate with this brand? Do I resonate with this company as a person? Because this is a risky decision by making this purchase. And I think B2B marketing skips over the pathos piece. And then you have people like, if you think of like Apple, where Apple is not a category leader in any product. Like they're not number one in phones. They're not number one in music. They're not number one in computers. They're not number one in anything. And yet they have this giant market cap, which is all to do with the way that they've created that brand affinity. And so they have this pathos, right? It's like, this is a brand I have an emotional valence with. And I can tell you, they didn't do that just through creative. They did that through understanding the arguments that their ICP really wanted to hear.
Conscious effort on their part.
That's right. In fact, one last point is really, this is like critical, is remember, the argument to persuade someone else isn't the same argument that persuaded you to believe it.
Right. On this note, Eric, thank you so much.
Thank you. This is so great.
It was incredible. If anyone wants to connect with you, they can find you on LinkedIn, I'm sure. Thank you so much. We're going to jump off for 100 seconds and be back with the next speaker. Stay there.